They thought they were untouchable. I watched them from the darkness, the light from their expensive crystal glasses refracting against the VIP velvet, casting jagged shadows across the room. They were clinking glasses, celebrating a victory they hadn't earned, in a venue they hadn't paid for, while I sat in the shadows like an uninvited ghost. But they forgot the most basic law of the world I inhabit: I don't get mad. I get even. Before I tell you how I dismantled a $10 million dynasty in less than an hour, do me a favor. Drop a comment below, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. This is a community of people who know what it's like to be the invisible engine, and I want to know who is standing with me today. The timeline rewinds to 45 minutes earlier. I pulled my charcoal sedan up to the curb of the Obsidian Lounge. The valet, a young man with a headset and a look of practiced boredom, barely glanced at me. His eyes were already scanning the street behind me, looking for the low-slung Ferraris and the roaring G-Wagons that usually defined this block. To him, I was a nobody. A mid-sized sedan in a sea of supercars. I stepped out, the cool evening air of the city biting at my skin. I didn't wait for him to open my door. I walked around, caught his eye, and handed him a $100 bill. I watched his entire posture change. His spine straightened, his eyes widened, and suddenly, I was the most important person on the sidewalk. That was the first sign. In the world my family inhabits, you are either the show or the wallet. I had always been the wallet. The Obsidian Lounge was the kind of place that prided itself on being a secret. It was underground, unmarked, and darker than a cave once you passed the heavy steel doors. This was my sister Brittany's playground. Tonight was the launch of her influencer brand, a vanity project I had quietly funded for 18 months. Why? Because it was the tax I paid to keep my parents, Susan and Robert, off my back. It was the price I paid to be allowed to run my own company, Apex Logistics, without them meddling in my unfeminine business. I walked toward the velvet rope. The bouncer, a man whose neck was wider than my waist, checked his tablet. He looked for my name. He didn't see Savannah, CEO of Apex. He saw Savannah +1. He waved me through with a jerk of his thumb, but he didn't point toward the main floor. He pointed toward a side corridor, past the restrooms. I assumed it was a mistake. I assumed he didn't know that my signature was the only reason the rent check for this very building had cleared the bank 3 days ago. Then, I saw my mother. Susan wasn't waiting to greet me. She was waiting to intercept me. She stepped out of the shadows like a border patrol agent, blocking the view of the main VIP booths where Tyler, my fiancé, and Brittany were holding court. She looked me up and down. Her eyes lingered on my blazer. It was a $4,000 tailored piece, professional and sharp, but to her, it was a work uniform. "You're here," she said, her voice tight, devoid of any maternal warmth. "And you're wearing that." We talked about the aesthetic, Savannah. This is a high-flash photography event. We need cohesion. You look like you're heading to a board meeting, not a launch. She didn't hug me. She didn't ask how my 80-hour workweek had gone, or how the port negotiations had ended. She grabbed my elbow and steered me away from the flashing lights. We went down the service corridor, past the clattering of the kitchen's swinging doors and the smell of industrial dish soap. There, tucked into a damp, dark alcove next to the coat check station, was a metal folding table. It was the kind of table you'd find in a basement or a garage. No tablecloth. One solitary, cold metal chair. It was the vendor table. "We're just so tight on space in the main booth," she said, her voice airy and unconvincing. "Tyler has all the investors there, and Brittany needs her vibe crew for the TikToks. Honestly, you just look out of place in the photos. This is better. You can watch from here. Just try not to draw attention to yourself." She patted my arm, a gesture that felt more like a threat than a comfort, and vanished back into the glamour. I stood there staring at that metal chair. In any other context, in a boardroom, at the port, in a negotiation with a union boss, I would have laughed in her face and walked out. But I didn't. I felt my knees weaken. I almost sat down. That is the most dangerous part of growing up in a family like mine. Cruelty doesn't feel like cruelty when it's your native language. It feels like gravity. For 29 years, I had been conditioned to accept the scraps. I had been taught that my utility was the only currency I had to pay for their love. This is the trap of normalized abuse. It rewires your survival instincts. It tells you that sitting in the dark is better than being exiled. I looked at my mother's back as she rushed toward the VIP section to fix Brittany's hair. She didn't look back. She wasn't worried that I would leave. She was banking on my conditioning. She was betting everything on the fact that Savannah always stays. Savannah always pays. Savannah always accepts the corner. I pulled out the metal chair. It scraped against the concrete floor with a sound like a scream. I sat down. But the second that cold, unforgiving metal touched my spine, the conditioning snapped. It wasn't a loud noise. It was a silent, internal realignment. I looked at the coat check girl. She was 19, maybe 20, and she was looking at me with pure, unadulterated pity. I didn't want her pity. I realized then that I wasn't a guest. I wasn't a sister or a daughter or a fiancé. I was infrastructure. I was the plumbing, the wiring, the foundation. And infrastructure has one unique power: it can be shut down. To understand the magnitude of what I was about to do, you have to look outside the walls of the Obsidian Lounge. While Tyler was toasting his tech genius with $40 cocktails, 60 miles away at the port of Los Angeles, a fleet of 48 semi-trucks was idling. They were branded with the Apex Logistics logo. Inside those containers sat $6.1 million worth of inventory, the entire national launch stock for Tyler's new hardware. This launch was Tyler's entire life. It was the golden ticket my parents were banking on for their retirement. And I was the only reason it was moving. When every other shipping company laughed at Tyler's impossible timeline and his shoestring budget, I stepped in. I pulled strings. I called in favors I had spent 10 years earning. I absorbed the overtime costs. I personally oversaw the routing to ensure not a single unit was late. I wasn't just his fiancé. I was his supply chain. I was the invisible engine that kept their shiny, expensive lives moving forward. I looked across the room at my father, Robert. He was laughing, clapping Tyler on the back. 2 years ago, when Robert made the bad investments that almost cost them their home, I was the one who wired the funds to bail him out. I didn't ask for a thank you. I didn't ask for my name on a plaque. I just did it because that is what the engine does. It works. It keeps the lights on so the stars can shine. But tonight, looking at them from my folding table next to the coat check, I realized I had made a critical calculation error. I thought I was their partner. In reality, I was their utility. And you don't thank the electricity. You only notice it when it cuts out. I reached into my clutch and pulled out my work phone. It was a secure, encrypted device linked directly to the central dispatch system of Apex Logistics. I ignored the laughter from the VIP booth. I ignored the flash of the cameras. My focus narrowed entirely to the fleet management interface. The screen showed the fleet status, ready for departure. The drivers were waiting for the final digital signature to roll out of the depot and begin the nationwide delivery. My thumb hovered over the override command. This wasn't a tantrum. This was a business decision. Tyler had violated the unwritten clause of our partnership, mutual respect. And in the world of logistics, when you violate the contract, you lose the cargo. I executed the command. I typed in my private authorization code. The screen flashed a predatory, high-contrast red. Status updated, locked, grounded, return to base. I typed one text message to my VP of Operations, a man who I knew was monitoring the launch board from his home office. Kill it. Turn the trucks around. Breach of character. Do it now. I pressed send. The phone gave a small, silent vibration. A confirmation. The engine had stopped. Now, I just had to wait for the lights to go out. It took exactly 90 seconds for the shockwave to travel from the port to the Obsidian Lounge. I watched Tyler pull his phone from his jacket pocket. He looked annoyed at the interruption. He glanced at the screen, expecting a congratulatory text or a stock update. Instead, his brow furrowed. He tapped the screen aggressively. He swiped to refresh, over and over, as if he could scrub away the reality staring back at him. Then he looked up. His eyes scanned the room, bypassing the investors and the influencers, until they locked onto me, the woman sitting at the folding table in the dark. He didn't look worried. He looked furious. He stormed across the room, weaving through the dancers like a predator. My mother and Brittany followed him, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. Tyler stopped in front of my metal table, looming over me, his shadow blotting out what little light I had. "What did you do?" he hissed, his voice trembling with indignation. "I just got a notification. The fleet is grounded. The system says administrative lock. Fix it now, Savannah. We launch in 8 hours." He bypassed why completely. In his mind, I wasn't a human with a grievance. I was a malfunctioning server that needed a reboot. "It's not a glitch, Tyler," I said. My voice was calm, level, and cold enough to cut glass. "I revoked the clearance. The trucks aren't moving. In fact, they're already heading back to the warehouse." "Are you insane?" Brittany chimed in, her voice shrill and piercing. "This is my launch party. You're ruining the vibe because you're jealous that I'm in the booth and you're back here with the coats. It's pathetic, Savannah. Truly pathetic." "Lower your voice," my mother snapped, but she wasn't looking at Brittany. She was glaring at me. "Savannah, you are embarrassing this family. Fix the shipping. Apologize to Tyler, and maybe we can discuss letting you sit at the main table for dessert. Stop acting hysterical." Hysterical. That was their favorite word for any woman who refused to be convenient. I placed my phone on the metal table and pressed the speaker button. "Ben," I said clearly. "You're on speaker." "Go ahead, Savannah." My VP's voice filled the alcove, crisp and professional. "Terminate the Brooks Technology contract immediately," I said, looking Tyler dead in the eye. "Cite the character clause. Irreconcilable breakdown of trust. Effective immediately." "Copy that," Ben replied. "Contract voided. Fleet is returning to base. The release fees will be billed to their primary account." "You can't do that," Tyler screamed, forgetting to keep his voice low. "We have a deal. You can't cancel $6 million of logistics because your feelings are hurt." "I just did," I replied. Before he could lunge at me, a shadow fell over the table. The crowd parted, not for Tyler, but for a man walking with the kind of quiet authority that makes room noise cease. It was Marcus, the legendary venture capitalist who had put the seed money into Tyler's company. He walked right past Tyler. He didn't even glance at my mother. He stopped in front of my folding table. "Savannah," Marcus said, his voice warm and genuinely confused. He extended a hand. "I was looking for you in the VIP section. Why is the Queen of Supply Chain sitting in the dark?" The silence that followed was absolute. My mother's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Tyler looked like he had swallowed a handful of glass. "Just handling some last-minute adjustments, Marcus," I said, shaking his hand without standing up. "Well," Marcus said, turning to look at Tyler with cold, flat eyes. "I hope you treated her well tonight, son. You do realize Apex Logistics is the only reason my firm backed your hardware, right? We invest in infrastructure, not ideas. And Savannah is the best infrastructure in the game." The color drained from Tyler's face so fast he looked like a ghost. The narrative they had built, that I was the lucky sister, the assistant fiancé, had just been dismantled in 3 sentences. Marcus looked at the folding table, then back at me. "This isn't a seat for a partner," he said quietly. "It looks more like a seat for a servant." Tyler looked like a trapped animal. He needed to prove to his biggest investor that this was just a misunderstanding. He forced a smile that looked more like a grimace of pain. "Marcus, you have it all wrong," he stammered. "We adore Savannah. She hates the spotlight. We gave her this private table so she could relax. Look, I even bought her a gift." He lunged toward the end of the metal table where a small, flat box wrapped in silver paper sat. He shoved it toward me, his hands shaking. "Open it, Savannah. Show Marcus how much we care about you. It's for our future." I reached for it with the caution of a bomb technician. I peeled back the silver paper. There was no velvet box inside. No jewelry. It was a thick, cream-colored envelope with a legal seal. I opened the flap and slid the contents out onto the cold metal. It wasn't a love letter. It was a contract. "It's just some housekeeping for the wedding," Tyler said quickly, sweat beading on his forehead. "Just some asset protection stuff so we can merge our finances smoothly. I wanted to surprise you with financial security." I flipped past the first page. I turned to page 7. My eyes narrowed. Buried in the dense legalese of paragraph 12, section B, was a clause titled Irrevocable Proxy. It granted Tyler full voting rights for my shares in Apex Logistics in the event of my incapacity or absence. And right below that, a durable power of attorney, effective immediately upon signature. The pieces fell into place with a sickening click. The isolation at the dark table. The endless glasses of champagne the waiter had tried to press on me earlier, which I had refused. The pressure to just relax. This wasn't a launch party. It was a heist. Tyler hadn't invited me here to celebrate. He had invited me here to get me drunk, keep me in the dark, and have me sign away control of my company under the guise of wedding paperwork. I looked up at him. The man I was supposed to marry wasn't looking at me with love. He was looking at me with the panic of a con artist whose mark just spotted the mirror. "You didn't buy me a gift," I said, my voice barely a whisper but echoing in the hushed room. "You bought yourself a company." I turned the document around and slid it toward Marcus. "Read paragraph 12, I said. He tried to steal my vote. Marcus put on his reading glasses. He read the clause. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The silence that stretched was the sound of a guillotine blade hanging in the air. Marcus set the document down. "Unethical business practices," he said. "Clause 4.1 of our investment agreement. Any attempt to defraud a partner or engage in predatory legal maneuvering constitutes an immediate breach. You didn't just lose your logistics, Tyler. You lost your funding. My firm is pulling out, effective immediately." My mother let out a strangled sob. She grabbed my arm. "Savannah, please. Fix this. Tell Marcus it was a misunderstanding. Tyler loves you. We all love you. You're our favorite girl." I looked down at her hand on my arm. The same hand that had steered me to the folding table. "Your favorite girl," I repeated. 10 minutes ago, I was an embarrassment. 10 minutes ago, I wasn't aesthetic enough to be seen. I pulled my arm away. I looked at Tyler. He was staring at the floor, defeated. "You didn't just lose a fleet," I told him. "You lost the only person who knew how to save you." I picked up my clutch. I walked past the silent crowd, past the VIP booths that now looked cheap and tawdry under the harsh lights. I walked out of the Obsidian Lounge and into the cool night air. Behind me, I could hear the chaos starting, the shouting, the accusations, the sound of a dynasty crumbling into dust. But I didn't turn around. The next morning, the sun hit my desk at 7 a.m. It was the quietest my office had ever been. Usually, the morning of a major client launch is a war room. Today, there was only the hum of the servers. I looked at my monitors. The fleet was still grounded at the depot. 48 trucks sitting in neat, idle rows. Brooks Technology stock was in free fall, plummeting 30% in pre-market trading. Tyler was no longer a visionary, he was just a guy with a warehouse full of plastic he couldn't move. I could have left them there. I could have let the inventory rot, dragging out a lawsuit to bleed them dry. That would have been revenge. But revenge is just another form of attachment. It keeps you tied to the people you hate. I wanted to be free. I called a disaster relief nonprofit. "I have 48 trucks and drivers ready to roll," I told their director. "I'm donating the entire logistics capacity. We can load your supplies by noon. It's a write-off. Consider it an investment in something real." As I authorized the new route, the weight in my chest vanished. I wasn't the scaffolding for my family's dysfunction anymore. I was the driver of my own life. If you've ever had to remind someone that your kindness has a limit, hit that like button and share this story. Let's remind the world that self-respect is non-negotiable. If this story stirred something inside you, don't scroll away in silence. Tap like, it tells us these stories deserve to be told. Subscribe to Vengeful Goddess for unforgettable tales of betrayal, resilience, and justice, stories you won't hear anywhere else. Turn on the bell icon, so the next story reaches you the moment it drops. Your support keeps these voices alive. Because sometimes, revenge isn't loud, being heard is.